my presentation today is the representation and oftentimes appropriation of the Holocaust in superhero comics. As a content warning, there is one graphic depiction of genocide in the slides, but it's straight out of a Marvel comic and not out of range of what you would normally encounter in your average comic. A couple of years ago, I was sitting in one of Concordia University's student lounges having a conversation about religion with a group of classmates. A stranger approached us and, having learned that I'm Jewish from overhearing our conversation, he asked me the following question. Why don't Jews just get over the Holocaust already? Why do you still care about it so much? I think that this question says a lot about the state of Holocaust education in North America. But before I dive into the data, I want to do a small experiment. How many people here have learned about the Holocaust as a part of their school curriculum? Okay, most people, that's good. And how many people have encountered representations of the Holocaust in popular media outside the school? Also almost everybody. Okay, interesting. So now I'm going to backtrack a bit. According to recent statistics from the FBI and Statistics Canada, Jews make up just over 60% of all victims of religiously motivated hate crimes in the US and just under 60% of religiously motivated hate crimes in Canada, even though we're only 2.4% of the American population and 1.4% of the Canadian population. We desperately need to reduce anti-Semitic attitudes, and research shows that Holocaust education is one of the things that can help to do that. Unfortunately, not a lot of students are learning about the Holocaust as a part of their school curriculum. According to Liberation 75, a project mapping Holocaust education in North America, about a third of American and Canadian students think that the Holocaust was exaggerated or made up. In Canada, over half of all students are learning about the Holocaust from popular media, such as books, comics, films, games, and television shows. That means that it's absolutely crucial for popular media, comics included, to represent the Holocaust accurately, because comics might very well be the only exposure to the Holocaust that some readers are going to get. I'm not the first person to talk about how the Holocaust is represented in comics. There isn't a lot of pre-existing scholarly material, but what scholarship does exist is very insightful. One author, Joanne Petit, describes how superhero comics tend to portray the Holocaust as a victimless crime by failing to acknowledge or represent the identities of the victims. Popular portrayals of the Holocaust tend to mythologize and thus oversimplify the atrocity of genocide, while ignoring or sidelining the identities and experiences of the real-world victims. I can't address every single example of Holocaust appropriation in superhero comics within the scope of 15 minutes, so I decided to pick one example from Marvel and one example from DC to illustrate just some of the problematic ways in which the Holocaust is used by these two major publishers. These examples were chosen not because of any particular significance or popularity, but rather because they do a very good job of showing just how problematic Holocaust appropriation can be. My first example comes from a Marvel comic. In a 2008 storyline titled Avengers Invaders, the characters encounter life model decoys, or LMDs, which are robots with advanced artificial intelligence. In the storyline, these robots are being destroyed on a mass scale. The LMDs and their destruction are consistently compared to the Jewish experience during the Holocaust. The robots have numbers and barcodes tattooed onto their forearms, which is a clear reference to a common practice in concentration camps. And this is the worst slide for the slides, that there is a completely tasteless page in which dead LMDs are compared to giant piles of starved and twisted Jewish corpses. Let's break down everything that's wrong with this image. Firstly, it should be obvious that it is demeaning and dehumanizing to compare ethnic minorities to non-sentient objects, even objects with the appearance of life. Secondly, the storyline here makes essentially the same leap of logic made by the people who march around with yellow stars to protest vaccine mandates, or really anyone who compares the Holocaust to unrelated social justice movements, whether legitimate or not. There is a popular belief that if you can successfully compare a specific situation to Jewish suffering during the Holocaust, then it must be a situation worthy of attention. It's very problematic and unfortunately common for people to depend on the murder of Jews as a sort of moral currency to promote whatever cause they most believe in. During the course of the Avengers Invaders storyline, it is revealed that life model decoys are neither sentient nor alive after all, which makes the comparison to dead Jews all the more tasteless and offensive. My second example comes from DC. I came across it during the course of my thesis research, so it's an example from Wonder Woman. In 2006, in Wonder Woman number 14, Wonder Woman encounters a villain named Captain Nazi. Very subtle, I know. In episode 15, Diana, or Wonder Woman, uses her lasso to force Captain Nazi to relive childhood trauma. Later, a group of Nazi invaders try to kill Wonder Woman's mother and take over Themyscira, her homeland. There are many problems with this storyline too. The first and most obvious is that we're teaching empathy for the Nazis while totally ignoring the inhumanity of their crimes and the fate of their victims. Which leads me to the second, more subtle problem, which is that we're not accurately representing Nazis, their actions, or their philosophies. We're detaching the idea of Nazis from the historical reality of their crimes. In these comics, the bad guys who are called Nazis are not really Nazis, but just generic bad guys who, for no particular reason, happen to have swastikas decorating their armbands. The very specific historical meaning and significance. When popular media use Holocaust imagery at every opportunity while getting rid of all identifying characteristics of the Nazis and their victims, we strip the memory and legacy of the Holocaust of potency and meaning. People who read these kinds of stories are naturally going to wonder why Jews and other victims care so much about the Holocaust. They're repeatedly exposed to the idea that the atrocities that occurred in Europe during the Second World War weren't really a big deal and had nothing much to do with Jews. This is, in my opinion, even more insidious and dangerous than outright Holocaust denial. It's happening on a larger scale, and since people don't tend to be aware of just how problematic these ideas are, we're not doing anything as a society to counter it. Now we can finally turn to DC Bombshells for an example of how to tell stories about the Holocaust right. DC Bombshells by Margaret Bennett and illustrated by Margaret Savage reverses the trend of portraying Jews as either non-existent or dead. DC Bombshells reimagines classic superheroines as Jewish and/or Roma warriors who lived during the Second World War and who used their powers to save fellow Jews and other victims from the Nazis. Unlike most superhero comics, DC Bombshells actually acknowledges and represents the identities and experiences of the victims of the Holocaust. By doing so, Bombshells doesn't ignore the anti-Semitism that was the driving force of World War II, but rather challenges it head-on. In this panel, Kate Kane, or Batwoman, confronts a man who is selling the names of Jewish families to the Nazis. The man tries to excuse his actions by claiming that his victim was just a Jew. Kate, in a speech bubble made of ice, replies, "So am I." In this storyline, it is made absolutely clear that Jews are not disposable objects, nor are we helpless victims. The phrase, "so am I," has been stuck in my mind ever since I first read it. We can feel Kate's hurt and anger bleeding off the page. This one panel, with 3 crucial words, allows the reader to dip into the experience of being Jewish, to learn what it feels like to have to fight for your right to exist in a world that considers you to be less than human. It feels to me that Kate is speaking back not only against the man who sees his victims as just Jews, but also against the comics that portray Jewish life as cheap or invisible. My favorite character in DC Bombshells, though, is Miriam Patel, whose name may or may not mean onion, but that's besides the point. Miriam lives in the fictional Berlin ghetto. Trying to calm the fears of Jewish children in hiding with her, Miriam tells the stories of 6 Jewish heroines, Shifra, Hulda, Abigail, Zipporah, Asnat, and Miriam. Saying the names of these heroines over and over, and eventually their acronym, Shazam, transforms her into the heroine Miri Marvel. Mary Marvel does not need to look further than her own culture, her own history, to find the strength and courage she needs to lead her people to prosperity and freedom. And more imagery dripping with reference to Jewish theology, Mary Marvel leads the Jews of the Berlin ghetto to freedom by crossing the split sea into Atlantis. Miriam draws her strength from the same role models who have inspired Jewish girls and women for countless generations, myself included. By drawing on authentic Jewish culture and practice, Margaret Bennett and her co-creators teach us that being Jewish isn't about dying to serve the world as some metaphor for social justice, nor are we portrayed as passive and helpless victims dependent on the intervention of outside rescuers. Mary Marvel and Kay Kane's strength, initiative, and bravery are representative of how Jews have heroically resisted and survived various attempts at genocide over the course of over 2,000 years. In the Bombshells universe, as in the real world, being Jewish means having access to a deep culture and a rich history that, during the Holocaust, gave us the strength to fight back, that gave us hope that there would be a future, that taught us how to survive against incredible odds. Just in case there are any current or future content creators in the audience, I'm going to leave you with a practical exercise that you can use whenever you're considering using Nazis in your storyline. Can you replace the Nazis with evil Teletubbies without losing any plot whatsoever? If the answer is yes, ditch the Nazis. Now, of course, I know that you can't really use Teletubbies as villains because they're under copyright, while using Nazis is easy and free. It's unfortunately all too easy to ignore the true cost of having access to such seemingly cheap and convenient villains. After all, the people we lost to the gas chambers and crematoria were just Jews and other seemingly insignificant minorities. But as Kate Kane said it so well, so am I. And I would just like to take a brief moment to thank Benjamin Wu and the Rocket Lab for sponsoring my participation in the San Diego Comic-Con, and to all my family and friends for their help and advice in preparing this presentation.